Trade chatter surrounding Tom Wilson.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Cap. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the crazy chatter surrounding trades about Tom Wilson. Is he going out to Toronto? That kind of thing. We'll talk about that in the show. Then we'll talk about Brian MacLellan and what has his response been to Tom Wilson about wanting to get a deal done. And then ultimately, what does Tom mean to this Capitals team? But just to get it going here, it is the off season, and a lot of blogs and podcasters and writers surrounding the Caps team, some around the NHL, have speculated that, trading Tom Wilson would be a good idea. And for all that, I'm going to say no. There are not a lot of players out there that bring the skill set that Tom Wilson brings to this team. Oftentimes I talk to people around the NHL and they lump Tom Wilson in the same category as like a Reeves or a Maroon. And I'm here to say, not an apples for apples comparison at all. For one, Reeves and Maroon do not score 20 goals a season. They just don't bring that. So what does Tom Wilson bring to this team? He brings leadership, he brings goal scoring, and he brings a physicality that I think that he is often painted as with a broad brush, is he's just a physical guy because he likes to fight and he has a history of being suspended and that kind of thing. Sure, those are a part of his game, but I do feel that Tom Wilson has evolved and he's a much better player than when he was first in the league. When he was a young guy, he would drop the mitts at the drop of a hat. Even if you wanted to fight for no reason, he was going to fight you and he was going to destroy you. But he has gotten wiser. He's seen what Alex Ovechkin has done. Let's face it, Alex Ovechkin does not fight nearly as much as he used to. He used to fight quite often. His last major fight was Svechnikov, and that was 2019, if memory serves. So, as you grow and you mature, you learn that if there's another guy on the team, a younger guy that wants to be the physical guy, let him fight the fights, and Alex Ovechkin, that's what he has Tom Wilson for to a certain extent, is to be that muscle, right? So I don't got to fight those fights. That was Tom Wilson's job. Or, at the time, Garnet Hathaway, something like that. Those guys will fight my battles for me. So I think that to a certain extent, you've seen Tom Wilson's game evolve. You see that he's not just this junkyard dog that is going to fight at a moment's notice. He is a guy that is just working on his goal scoring. He still does have that physicality. And one of the most things I like about his physical game is he's getting to the point now where his reputation has preceded him. Sometimes he doesn't even need to drop the gloves. He will just skate into the vicinity of where something is about to take place and it'll disperse. And that is, him casting a wide shadow. People know what he brings. So don't get me wrong. There are still a lot of quote unquote tough guys around the league, including Ryan Reeves, that like to make a name for themselves by fighting someone like Tom Wilson, because let's face it, that's all Reeves is that junkyard dog. He went out to New York because that was a young team that didn't have any grit. And then that's why he went out to Minnesota, because Minnesota didn't have enough grit. Let's face it, he doesn't have much of a skill set, those guys, other than fighting. Tom Wilson is much different than that. Even just taking a look at his stats here, the pretty impressive, all things considered. And we know that he missed a good chunk of this season. He only played in 33 games because of the knee issue. So he had 13 goals in the 21-22 season, 24 goals. The 2021 season, 13, the 19-20 season, 21, the 18-19 season, 22. So that's what I'm talking about. That is what separates him from those other players that he gets lumped in with, as just being this tough guy. Let's face it, he does have that skill set. He will fight and destroy most anyone in the NHL. And I think that is what teams don't like about him. If you think about some of his most things that have been leveled against him. If you remember when Panarin jumped on his back and Tom Wilson threw him down. Well, I always thought to myself about that. Well, what were you doing jumping on his back in the first place? You play with the bull, you get the horns. And in this case, Panarin got the horn, right? That's what happened. So I think that a lot of people just tried to make names for themselves and provoke someone like Tom Wilson. And that's why I think sometimes he gets into the trouble that he used to get into. Again, I do see his game evolving, and that's what's promising. And that is what I think makes him so important to this team. And just those great leadership qualities on and off the ice. As we know, he gets involved in charitable organizations and doing things around the DC area. So endearing himself, not only on the ice, but off the ice, is just being a really stand-up guy and a great person. Again, he is a guy that, started off being that tough guy, but he has evolved big time. So just taking a look at it here and kind of where all this craziness emanates from, and you take a look back on him when he tore that ACL during the playoffs. I thought, he was just going to miss a shift and he'd be back out there. As it turns out, that was the rest. He did not play in the rest of the playoffs. He did not play in a good chunk of this last season. And that just was a testament of what kind of player he is. I've often said if you had Wilson, you had Backstrom, and you had Carlson on the ice the entire season, I think the team would be in the playoffs. Probably not in the Stanley Cup final, but they would be in the playoffs, probably as a wild card team. So that is the importance. Guess what? Tom Wilson missed a good chunk of this last season. The Caps missed the playoffs for the first time since 2014. So you can draw lines to those guys and their importance to this team. So that's just a real important thing to look at going forward here. All right. So after the break here, we will talk about Tom Wilson. Who is he as a player? If you're an outsider watching this podcast or listening to it, and you think to yourself, Tom Wilson, he's just a tough guy. That's all he is. He's just muscle. That's all he is. Well, we'll talk a little bit more in depth what kind of player he really is coming up. All right, our next sponsor here is from Bird Dogs. And here, let me tell you something about this, guys. Guys always wear jeans. They wear khakis. They just wear basic clothing. They don't really concern themselves too much with comfort. Women do. Why do women? They always got comfortable clothing. Guys just, we're resigned to the fact of just wearing whatever we're supposed to wear. But now I found something that is comfortable in Bird Dogs. And let me tell you something about them. I look better and I feel great wearing Bird Dogs. They got that stretchy fabric that just makes you look a lot better than those boxy, cargo shorts that they used to wear years ago. They give me the freedom to wear one pair of shorts, pants to the golf course, to a meeting, to meeting friends after. They're so versatile and they come in, their shorts are comfortable, their pants are comfortable. You really need a pair of Bird Dogs. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And when you enter a promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. So go to Bird Dogs today. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals on your podcatcher of choice and YouTube. I got a lot of great interviews lined up this summer, not to mention I got the draft covered, I got free agency covered. So subscribe to Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we're going to talk about what kind of player is Tom Wilson intrinsically and his uttermost fiber. Who is he as a player? He's not just a tough guy. I mean, that is part of his game, but that's not all of who he really is. And then just talking about his importance, without the 6'4", 220-pound power forward, the team was missing one of their most versatile forwards. He is an X factor on the top line, a vital member of the penalty kill, and a physical forward who can spark his team with big hits, puck battles, and eye-catching plays. That's what I'm talking about. So to just, maybe if you're not a fan of the Capitals, take a look at some of his highlight footage other than his fights and see what he brings to the game. A 20-goal score 2 seasons ago. That's what I'm saying. So just to paint him with a brush that he's just a tough guy is a bit short-sighted. Not only that, but the Caps lost just as many games as they won without Wilson in the mix. And he has also had 22 points in just 33 appearances, and his .66 points per game pace would have had him on track for another 50-point campaign had he played in all 82 games. Plus, down the stretch, he was among the team's top performers, and when he was healthy, his effort was consistent night in and night out, writes the Hockey News. So again, it's just all this trade chatter that he should go to Toronto. And let me be clear. I understand why they would want to talk about Wilson going out to Toronto. Is Toronto going to get it a lot better with Wilson on the team? You better believe it. Would I like a Nylander deal coming to the Capitals? Sure, as long as it didn't involve Wilson going out to Toronto, I would be willing to listen to that. While MacLellan does want to revamp the top six and make changes as the team starts to retool and prep for a rebuild when the Ovi era ends, removing Wilson would also take away one of the team's top leaders, a top contributor, and a future face of the franchise. And he's somewhat expected to be the next captain when Ovi hangs up the skates. And I've spoke about this ever since I started doing this podcast, and even my previous Capitals podcast, that I see him being the captain. I'm not saying I started it, but I've talked about it for a long time, that I see him being the next leader of this team. And we don't want to talk too much about Ovi hanging up the skates. I know we got 3 years with him left on the team, so we don't need to worry about that. So as long as Tom Wilson can stay healthy, I think that he is going to be a really great captain of this team someday. But with that said, I do not want to squander these remaining years and just saying, well, we're not going to be competitive until, Alex Ovechkin hangs up the skates. Because if that's the case, if that is the attitude that Brian MacLellan has, I think he'll be the next one looking for a job, because I don't think that Ted Leonsis is going to have the patience for this team to just kind of flail, wildly until, Ovi leaves, and then magic, something's going to happen. So I do think that this team needs someone like a Wilson to plan for the future, because we all hear that this team wants to get younger. So when the influx of young players come in, they are going to need someone as a leader. And I can think of no one better than Tom Wilson. He just seems to be a perfect fit for the job. So I do think that that is the direction that the Caps are going in. So there is no real speculation right now surrounding Wilson, but what has been vocalized is that Wilson wants to follow in Ovi's footsteps and spend the rest of his career with Washington. He also stressed that he won't play hardball when it comes to his extension, which is eligible to negotiate and sign come July 1st. Brian MacLellan, if you're listening or watching to this, find a way to figure this out. Let's not get this to the last moment. Let's face it, it's going to be very difficult for Tom Wilson when the Brinks truck backs up to his house and they're like, Tom Wilson comes to the door and like, can I help you? Yeah, I'm the guy with a truck full of money. You want to come out to X team? All you got to do is sign on the line. No, I'm happy with the Capitals. It's going to be difficult for any guy. Sure that he has some allegiances to the Capitals. Sure that there is some loyalty there, but it is going to be difficult. One of the interesting things that was said is, I just read that piece here that he said he didn't want to play hardball. He said he kind of leaves that up to his agent, but I watched that post-game presser. But one of the interesting things that he said is stranger things have happened, and stranger things have happened, like when Gretzky got traded. So it is possible that someone like Wilson could get traded. I don't want to even think about that being a possibility. And I know that this is the Hockey News. That's their assessment that he's not going anywhere, but they're not in the meetings with Wilson and his agent and GM Brian MacLellan. They don't really know. I want to say that he's going to be here. I really want to believe he's going to be here, but I just hope it doesn't go in that direction. Everyone knows I love it here and I want to be here. I just can't imagine ever playing for another team. I don't want that to happen. And of course, he's going to say that. What is he going to tell in the presser? Guys, I kind of want out of here. This place is a joke. He's not going to say that. So, again, it's the speculation. Why? Because it is the off season, and my show and RMNB and all the beat writers for the Capitals, they have to have fodder to talk about. And what interesting piece is there to talk about? Wilson getting traded to some team. In this case, a trade for Nylander, which again, I like Nylander coming here. I just don't like the return on it. So interesting conversations to be had, but I just do not think that is going to be the case. All right. So after the break here, we will talk about what Mac's thoughts are and where do all these rumors emanate from. We'll talk about that when Locked On Capitals continues. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop at eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So in this show, this episode of Locked On Capitals, we are talking about the chatter surrounding Tom Wilson and his future in Washington. It seems to be kind of a silly thing to talk about, but stranger things, to quote Tom Wilson, have happened. I'm just hoping it's so strange that it doesn't happen. So what does Max say? What is Max's feelings? The feeling is mutual for management, as Max said back in April that the plan is to lock down Wilson long term. Is that going to be the case? Give the guy what he wants, for gosh sake. I'd like for Tom to finish up in Washington. He's been a big part of our culture. Our group, MacLellan said, of the King Clancy nominee. His consistency got better throughout the years. We're going to do everything we can do to sign him with several big names and intriguing returns that could help DC are making their way through the rumor mill, including William Nylander, Alex DeBrincat, and Pierre-Luc Dubois, and more top-tier forwards. Giving up Wilson would be a mistake given his on and off ice impact. And based on Wilson and Mac's comments and what I'm hearing, it's not going to happen, writes the Hockey News. And that was her assessment. And I want to believe that that is the case, that he is not going to go anywhere. Again, it is going to be most difficult if he gets offered a substantial deal. I mean, money talks, right? And that will ultimately test the loyalty of Tom Wilson and his desire to want to stay here. But that is the chatter that is going around right now, is that he wants out. And where it emanates from, I read about it in RMNB, Russian Machine Never Breaks. They talked about, the return that they could potentially get for Tom Wilson. And you see the turmoil and everything that is going on out in Toronto now, that there is just this feeling that the Toronto Maple Leafs want to improve themselves. And what better thing to do than to add a good physical element and a good goal scorer. When you add to the tight salary cap, Austin Matthews' historic contract extension coming, and possible changes to the front office, you have to be willing to hear all rumors out. And recently there is one speculation involving Nylander and Washington. Things are not going according to plans for the Caps, but wish to offer Captain Alex Ovechkin another run at the Stanley Cup before he hangs up the skates. But the latest news point to Evgeny Kuznetsov wanting out, and Nicholas Backstrom, Tom Wilson, and Anthony Mathis still recovering from injury. Something big needs to occur and change drastically. This was in the hockey feed. They were talking about that. So what is some of those? So they talked about, if you follow the Caps and you follow this podcast, if you're an everydayer, about the possibilities of Kuznetsov and Backstrom potentially being on the move. But they talk about here, RMNB suggests that the Caps go after Nylander, who scored 40 goals and tallied 47 assists for the Maple Leafs last season. With changes coming to Toronto, the blog feels he might be able and available, it would be the right time for the Caps to strike, using the wise words of Sportsnet's Elliot Freeman. So RMNB wonders if a Willy for Willy trade would be a possibility after comparing Nylander's deal with Wilson. The only issue is Wilson's status, is he played 33 games this season, but his physical defensive abilities would definitely be welcome in Toronto. And of course they would. I mean, again, I think that he would be welcome pretty much anywhere he wanted to go. I don't think that someone's going to say, yeah, we don't need someone like Tom Wilson, around here. We don't need that kind of player. No, there's no other team out there that would want to pass on someone like Tom Wilson, a real, unicorn, a four-leaf clover, a unique player, suffices to say. So I think we need to do the right thing and lock up our future captain. It's my beliefs. I've said it for a long time. A lot of other people have spoke about it as much, is just taking care of it. Enough is enough. And let's not let this get to the last moment. Let's not even let that possibility sneak in there that he might be on the move. I think that would be the wrong move for the Capitals. That is for sure. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. Are you an everydayer of Locked On Capitals? I would love to hear from you. Just hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Capitals and say, hey, Dan, I am an everydayer of Locked On Capitals. I will give you a shout out on Friday's show. And coming up on tomorrow's show on Friday, it is something new that we're going to do this summer. It is called Caps Fans Friday, and I have my first guest already lined up. So if you would like to join me on Caps Fans Friday, I would love to talk Caps hockey with you for a segment, which is about 10 minutes or so. So if you would like to join me on this show and talk Caps hockey, hit me a DM on at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Caps, either a direct message or at me, and we'll set up a segment, and you can be on one of the upcoming episodes of Caps Fans Friday. It would be so much fun. When you're done listening to this podcast, head on over to Locked On NHL. They have you covered all summer. But most notably right now, it is the march towards the Stanley Cup. They got you covered there 5 days a week. And if you are a fan of DC sports, well, Locked On has got you covered. There's Locked On Nationals, Commanders, and Wizards. So subscribe to one of those podcasts today. All right, my name is Dan Holme of Locked On Capitals, where it is your team every day. And I'll talk to you again next time.